Okay, so we're going to jump right into today's presentation. We are really thrilled to introduce you today's guest speaker, Rick Guttersohn. Rick Guttersohn, LLMSW, is a social worker dedicated to helping individuals and organizations experience healing, transformation, and growth. Prior to his work as a counselor, coach, and consultant, he had a successful career as an executive director, transforming a declining nonprofit into one of the premier grief support organizations in Southeast Michigan. Rick's leadership philosophy and approach is influenced by his years of experience working with people after loss. He received his MSW from Wayne State University with a concentration in social work leadership and received his BSW from Spring Arbor University. Rick has completed a 2-year ministry internship leading small groups and serving in recovery. Prior to social work, Rick spent 10 years in retail management and sales before changing career paths and dedicating his life to serving others. Welcome to the virtual stage, Rick.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to join you. I've been where you're at in the networking meetings, the chambers, the local business groups, and I know how valuable they are to just the growth of your individual business, but more importantly, the collaborative effort of serving the community. And so I'm really grateful to be a part of this group today. And so I'm going to go back and forth between some slides, but I really want this to be something that kind of touches the heart a little bit too, because and you might be saying to yourself, like, how is a superhero leadership presentation supposed to touch the heart? My hope is that during this presentation that you find that question answered, and so I'm going to jump in and just kind of acknowledge that this is likely the geekiest presentation that you may ever hear, but also I think that this is going to be hopefully one of the more meaningful ones that you hear. And this stuff isn't just stuff that I've read or observed, although there's a lot of content that I read. I'm a big reader, or at least I was before I had a 2-year-old. Now I read mostly coloring books and ABC books, and the Pout Pout Fish is a personal favorite of my family. But I chose this picture because I feel like there's a lot to unpack in this picture. This person is carrying this burden or this pack on his shoulders, and I know what that feels like, and I'm sure that many of you feel that same way sometimes, or even feel this way right now. Of, the sun is setting, and it's getting a little dark, and it's getting a little exhausting, and you have this burden or this pack on your shoulders. And sometimes the visibility is very low. We don't necessarily have clarity about where we're heading or what the future holds. And there's this concern about the unknown. And I mean, the last 2 years, we've been confronted with this constant, concern about the unknown, and how do we lead when we have to kind of throw out the playbook and kind of start from scratch and figure out things that are not a part of our strategic plan. And I just feel like this picture embodies some of that struggle. And feel free in the chat if you either can relate with that feeling, or if you relate with anything that we kind of talk through. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts, or even just share your opinion or anything in the chat, because I think that can be really helpful to talk about. So the term here we're going to talk about is kryptonite. And so I'm a superhero nerd. I'm a pop culture nerd. I grew up loving kryptonite. Well, that's true, I guess. I loved Superman growing up. But the term kryptonite here, we're just going to define it as a weakness that limits our leadership or cripples our capacity. And for everyone, I would say that our leadership kryptonite is going to be different. And in studying leadership and working in the nonprofit sector and helping other leaders, I find that there's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of patterns and similarities that, even if the specifics of what we struggle with are different, the main theme can be very similar. And before we kind of jump into the presentation, I want to just embrace the geekiness of this, and I want to show a couple of examples of some leaders. So the first one that comes to mind may not be on your radar, but if anyone grew up in the 80s, you might be familiar with Optimus Prime. He was the leader of the Transformers, right? And I like the metaphor of that, because his job was to lead transformation, essentially, right? He's a transforming individual, but he's one of the more widely recognized leadership figures in cartoon and film regarding if you grew up in the 80s or so. So it's a name that we might be familiar with. But I would say that maybe not necessarily the most positive of leadership virtues or characters would be someone that from the Star Wars world, Emperor Palpatine, right? He leads where Optimus Prime leads sacrificially and leads with heart and courage. I would say that he leads based on fear and manipulation tactics to get people to do what he wants. And I'm sure we all know people who lead that way, right? More recently, I would say that in the last couple of years, there's a leader that, if you have seen any of the Avengers films, Thanos is a very strong-willed, domineering, kind of steamroll you type of leader, right? I mean, his leadership will is uncanny. A lot of us wish we had that kind of will, but his choices to do something with that strength of his is not always the most positive. Even though he believes deeply in what he's doing, it's not necessarily grounded in a moral compass. And then the last one I wanted to mention is, and if anyone's ever heard of this guy, please let me know, because if I had a prize to give you, you'd win the prize for like the uber geek like me. This character's name is Silver Surfer. Has anyone ever heard of Silver Surfer before?
Isn't he part of the four?
Fantastic Four.
Yeah, he's part. He's kind of connected with the Fantastic Four. Okay, good. You're tracking with the geekiness so far. I love it. So his quick backstory is really interesting in that he was confronted to stop this major villain called Galactus, who's like larger than most planets. And Galactus was coming after his planet, and Silver Surfer was kind of tasked with this, like, how do I save the planet? And he knew he couldn't defeat this bad guy, so he surrendered himself and sacrificed himself to save his planet, and then became kind of a servant of Galactus for a season until he found a way to escape his kind of tyranny and leadership. But he was willing to see that his greatest gift in leadership wasn't necessarily just to fight, but it was to surrender and act or sacrifice to protect all those that he loves and cares about. So those are some kind of more obscure references to leaders. But today we're going to talk about two specific ones. We're going to talk about Captain America, and we're going to talk about Superman, which is, obviously there's some connection there with the kryptonite part. But so thank you for tracking with me on that. I really appreciate it. But I think the reason I love talking about this stuff is because it's really relevant to our lives, even if we don't realize it. Because we think about these different things like, okay, it's a comic book movie, it's a superhero TV show, it's a whatever. But the reason I personally love these characters is not just because I grew up with them, but because I find like these meanings and these little themes in their stories that I can really relate with. And so I hope that maybe that's something that you can relate with too. So let's go back to our definition here. Kryptonite. Leadership kryptonite is a weakness that limits our leadership and cripples our capacity. And I don't have like a little crystal here to show you that, but many of you, I'm sure, have seen that visual if you've either seen a Superman movie or, just it's popular enough that it kind of transcends into all of pop culture, into our kind of our framework. So here's what we want to do. This is the dilemma that many of us have. And I want to ask you this question without explaining it, is we all have a choice when it comes to leadership. Do we choose the Superman mindset of leadership, or do we choose the Avengers or Captain America mindset of leadership? And the choice that we have and the way that we answer that question will make a major determination on not just who we are as leaders, but everyone who we influence, everyone who we serve, and ultimately success or potential struggles of our organizations. And so the way that we answer this question is vital. So here's what I want to do for a second. I think that while there's a lot of different types of leadership kryptonite, the one that I see most common in the nonprofit world, especially like the smaller nonprofits or the entrepreneurial, the small business world, is something that I like to call organizational codependency. And we might have some, if you worked in the mental health field or recovery world, we might have some familiarity with the term codependency. But really, codependency in an organizational context is basically us doing everything that we can and pouring our entire selves into our organization, which gets a lot of affirmation from those around us, right? We feel good about our success. We pour our heart and soul into this place. We love, what we do, and so we dedicate our entire being to it. But what we don't start to recognize is how much enmeshment starts to happen, how much we don't have the differentiation between who we are as an individual and who we are as a leader, or who our organization is. And it starts to become wrapped up in one, which again, in the short term can be good for a season. It can be fine for a season. It might even be affirmed for a season. But let me know if you've ever felt this way, right? You start off with this amazing passion for your service or your mission, and you have this great vision of what you want to accomplish through this organization, what you believe this organization or this business can become. And you're out there, things growing, you're making a difference, but then you start to hit a wall. And you don't always know what that wall is, but here's some symptoms of that wall. The sales start to slow down, or the participants or the clients start to slow down a little bit. That growth curve, either financially or impact-wise, starts to plateau and maybe even start to decline. Maybe a key leader leaves the organization, your right-hand person, or maybe if it's even, maybe you're that right-hand person and the founder resigns and you start to lose the organizational identity, and other team members kind of start to pursue other opportunities because they don't feel as excited as things were maybe a year or two ago, or maybe morale as a whole, whether it's yours or the team's or both, starts to decline, or maybe you just feel totally overworked, stuck, and burnt out. Can anyone relate with those feelings? I can. I've been there, right? And I think we don't always recognize it until it's too late. And I will tell you that typically what I've seen is it starts with this type of kryptonite, organizational codependency. So I think some of the symptoms we just covered, but the burnout, compassion fatigue, we lose our passion for what we used to love, and now it just becomes a day-to-day job, frustration, high turnover, lack of growth. And it's because we don't recognize our kryptonite. This often is because we've adopted the Superman leadership mindset, right? Think about Superman's traits. If you want to jump in, what are some of the superpowers in real life that Superman has? He has a ton. What are some of the superpowers that he has?
X-ray vision.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Super strength.
Yep.
You can fly.
Ability to fly.
Yeah, he can fly. Yep. Super speed. Not only can he fly, but he can, he's one of the fastest characters out there. I mean, anyone remember the late 70s movie where he's flying so fast that he turns the world around? I'm not sure the science backs that up, but somehow it works, right? He's heat vision. He's got freeze breath. I mean, this guy can do literally everything, right? And as small business owners or nonprofit leaders or entrepreneurs, we're in that same world, right? We have to do everything, right? Because we don't have often a team, or we have a team, but we're still developing them and growing them. But what happens is as we grow, we don't start to recognize that maybe using all of our powers and being everywhere all the time isn't the most effective form to keep growing, right? And think about this from Superman's perspective, right? How many times in the movies or comics or whatever has Lois Lane done something incredibly ridiculous because she knows Superman is going to fly in and save her, right? I remember a scene from a movie. She's standing on top of a building. She's taking photographs, but then whoever he was fighting bumps something or hits the ground. It shakes the building and she falls off. Why in the world was she standing on top of a building taking pictures? Well, she kind of has in her back pocket, like, Superman's probably going to come save me, right? But the problem is every time he comes and saves her, it's an opportunity that she doesn't get to learn from her mistakes, right? And as leaders, we kind of swoop in and save the day. I mean, here we go, we come flying in like, I'll save you, right? It feels good because we like feeling important. We like saving people and rescuing people, but who are we preventing from learning? Who are we preventing from growing because we're always rescuing them? Or even just the solo act, even though he's technically part of a team sometimes, typically Superman shows up and saves the day by himself. He's typically a solo act, even though he's a part of a bigger group like the Justice League. But even in the movies, it's like Justice League's getting their butt kicked, Superman shows up, boom, hero saves the day, right? The other challenge of this, though, is because he's a solo act, he doesn't really have any known weaknesses until Kryptonite shows up. And all of a sudden, he's totally taken out. But when you're totally taken out, you don't have that person to have in your back, or you don't have that thing. And for some reason, he's just never aware that this could be a possibility that shows up. And all of a sudden, he's down and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have a plan. There's nowhere there to pick him up. So even though I'm still talking about superheroes and comic book stuff, doesn't it kind of feel like I'm starting to describe some of the things that we wrestle with on a day-to-day basis as leaders? And it starts with a mindset. And so my challenge to everybody here, and I wish I had more time to kind of unpack all this stuff. I'm just kind of summarizing some other content that I've done in the past, but we have to be willing to start to shift our mindset. And it starts with this idea that this quote I love, it says, you can have control or you can have growth, but you can't have both. How many of us struggle in our organizations letting go of the control because we are so used to doing everything ourselves. And yet we know that that's not sustainable for ourselves. We burn out, but it's also not sustainable for the organization for it to grow beyond us. Because the last thing any of us wants to do as a leader is retire or resign or step down and then see the organization fall apart because we're not there. One of the best signs of leadership that we can have is, making sure that something's sustainable and scalable beyond us. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of this time here talking about. So how do you answer this question? Like, what matters more to you, control or growth? And if you answer control, that's okay. But then we have to shift our expectations of, all right, if my number one concern is or value is control, then what are the potential desired outcomes that come from being someone who values control? But if I value growth, it's going to shape and totally differentiate the type of leadership that I'm able to provide and hopefully send my organization on a different trajectory. So how you answer this question is a huge indicator of what you value and what's important to you. Here's the if you hear nothing else I talk about today, other than, if you remember the vivid image of Superman flying across your screen, hopefully you remember that too. But here's what I want you to remember. This quote, this principle: you must transition your mindset from being what's called a time teller to being a clock builder. And this is from a book called Built to Last by Jim Collins. He doesn't talk about the superhero stuff. That's my unique approach on it. But the principle of being a time teller is everyone's coming to you asking what time it is, right? And we've probably experienced that. Hey, how do you do this? Where is this found? How do you execute this thing? But we have to start to not only teach our team members how to tell time, but if we teach them how to actually build clocks, then they can teach their team members how to tell time. And now you start to create this leadership hierarchy that really transcends this one individual and allows your organization to scale, allows your organization to become sustainable. And it all starts with your mindset and one decision. Are you willing to invest your energy and your time and your love into training your team members to be clock builders and not just to come to you to find out what time it is? Here's the reason why this is important. So we're going to switch. We've been talking about the Superman leadership mindset. I want to switch gears, and I want to talk about the Captain America or the Avengers leadership mindset. It was a very popular film a couple years ago, Avengers Endgame. Has anyone seen that movie? Has anyone watched that movie? It was pretty big. I think it was one of the highest grossing films of all time, right? So there's some spoilers here, so I apologize in advance, but I can't present this part without the scene. So the end of the movie, I talked about the character Thanos. He's this big, daunting villain, and his task is to literally wipe out 50% of all of life across the universe. I've never had that big of a strategic plan before, nor do I want to, because that's fairly evil. But he's accomplishing it. He's winning. And the only person that's standing in his way is Captain America. I mean, and we just listed off all these superpowers that Superman has. Captain America is fairly normal. I mean, he's got some super strength, some super stamina, but not like Superman. He's just a guy with a shield. But his superpower is his courage. And so he's been beat up, he's been broken, bloodied, and his invincible shield has actually literally been broken in half. And he's laying on the ground, and he gets back up, and he tightens the shield. And he's got this grit and determination, and he stands up and looks. And by this time he stands up, not only is Thanos standing in front of him here, but an entire army of aliens have just kind of transported in, and it's one guy standing in their way. And I feel like this was us in March of 2020. This COVID thing comes in and seemingly just chaos, and no one knows what to do. And you're just standing there like, what do I do? But his superpower, his most amazing trait, wasn't his strength or his shield. It was his courage to just show up. But here's what I love about this scene is right when you feel like he's about to fail and nothing else is going to go right, the entire team shows up. They show up in the portals, that music swells. I get goosebumps every single time I see that scene because out of nowhere, you almost forgot that these people are there, but then they show up through these portals, and all the people that Captain America has invested in the past or trained up or developed or built relationships with in the past, they all show up when he needs them the most. And Thanos is absolutely shocked, and he's like, I didn't see this coming. And ultimately, the Avengers win the day. They save the day. They save all of the life. And it's an amazing journey, but it starts because for years, Captain America never made it about himself and didn't try to be everyone to everything or everything to everyone. He built a team. He invested. And I think my challenge to you is to think about this. If you are someone who's maybe had the Superman mindset in the past and didn't even recognize it, you might be hearing some of the symptoms like, yeah, I am exhausted, or yeah, I am the type of person who jumps in and just saves the day. Or maybe let me pull up a couple of questions that often are come up. Like, have you ever said some of these phrases? If you want it done right, you've got to do it yourself, or it'd just be faster if I do it myself, or maybe I wish they would just do it my way, right? Those are some questions or some statements that we all have said at one point or another, because often we are a solo act, or we're trying to build and grow things. We're trying to set a culture. But if Captain America always thought that way, he would have had what he needed to get accomplished in that situation, right? But because he thought differently, his team showed up when he needed them the most. And this is what I think is really cool. Just about, that mindset and things. Here's a couple of things that you can, here's the slide. I apologize. So here's a couple of things that you can ask yourself to begin transitioning your mindset and to develop that Avengers leadership mindset. What are my personal strengths? What are some of my limitations? Man, how many of us have such a hard time acknowledging that we have weaknesses? When's the last time you told a team member, someone who reports to you, and said, you know what, I'm not great at that, but I know you are. Would you be willing to help me out with that? That takes courage. That takes humility. It takes self-awareness. But yet our team becomes stronger because we have the humility and the self-awareness to recognize, like, there might be someone that's better equipped to do this than me. Or what about this one, right? Because it does make sense short term, right? If I just do that myself, I'll save time. But what's the opportunity cost of that? Both in the short term, something else I could have done with that time, but also long term, if I always do it myself, then I'm stuck here permanently. There's never going to be someone to take my spot. And I might not even be the best person to do this. The last two questions, I think, are harder questions. Am I willing to trust others? I mean, you might have been burnt in the past. It could have been a small thing like, okay, someone presented a report and turned it in, and it didn't have the grammarly, it wasn't spell checked or proofread. It didn't communicate exactly what you want to do. Or it could have been something major of like, they just dropped the ball and missed it, and you missed a grant opportunity. You missed the opportunity for a huge contract. You missed the opportunity for a major sales opportunity, whatever those things look like. And now you're really hesitant to trust somebody again because you don't want to get hurt again. You don't want to be disappointed again. And then the last one, am I willing to let go of control? Man, these are some hard questions, right? Who knew that talking about Superman and Captain America would be so convicting? And yet, man, I've lived this journey out, and I know many of you, I can see that between the facial expressions or just the mindset stuff that you shared earlier, like, this is real. And the way that we answer these questions isn't just about us in our offices or in our businesses. It's about the legacy of our leadership, the impact of our leadership, and the success long-term of our organizations. So just to simplify as we kind of wrap up here, I have got a lot of different content I've done in the past for culture leadership, but here's what I really want you to know. Like the way that you begin to do this to transition from a time teller to a clock builder is you have to multiply yourself. And the number one way to multiply yourself isn't just policies and procedures. It's before that. It's through culture. What do you love? What do you value? What is important to you? What is the things that have helped you be successful? And are you willing to build teams and build an organization around those things and not just accomplishments or resumes or LinkedIn profiles? Because if you love something and you care deeply about it, but you hire others who don't love that or don't believe the same way you do, you're going to have disunity in an organization, and you're going to have a team of people fighting for individual cultures. And it creates a default culture that default culture can become negative and toxic, and it leads back into our burnout. So here's 3 simple things that you can do to become a culture leader and to invest in culture leadership. The first one is to identify. The second one is to internalize. And then the third is to implement. And these have to be in this order. You can't do them out of order, otherwise you won't get it. So the first one, identify. What are the traits that make a good team member? If you're in the nonprofit world, people that are mission-oriented are very important. People that are willing to go above and beyond, people that are driven, people that love what you do. If you are serving people, someone mentioned foster care earlier. If you are someone who doesn't understand what foster care is, or someone who isn't passionate about that, they don't need to be working in that field. It doesn't matter what kind of development history they've got, what kind of amazing administrative gifts they have, how good of a facilitator or a fundraiser they are. If they don't love what you do, if they aren't passionate about what you do, it's not going to be a good fit. I don't care what they've accomplished in the past. So what are the traits that make a good team member? What are the values that your team is committed to? And maybe if you're an existing leader, but you've never done this work, start to interview the people like, hey, I see this person as someone who's a highly contributing member of my team. Talk to them, interview them individually. What are the things that you value? What are the things that you do? The way that you do this can be unique for every organization, and I wish I had more time to unpack that for you. But if you can survey people and interview them and ask them, like, what is it about this place that makes it special to you? What are the things that you do that help you be so successful? Or what are the things that you believe about what you do that can make you successful? That's a great way to create questions. But the key to this with the identify is identify the behaviors that drive those values. Because if it's just a value that you put on the wall, it won't become contagious. But if you can link it to a behavior and that behavior drives your mission forward or your business productivity forward, now you've got actionable items that you can coach other team members on. And it starts with this identification phase, right? So after this one, internalize. And this is where we get it wrong as leaders. We go from the identify to the implementation, right? We identify these values, we put them all on, on a paper, and then we train our team members on them. We are culture leaders. What we do is more important than what we say. And so the question to each of us is, are we willing to internalize those behaviors and commit ourselves to living out those values? Because at the end of the day, it won't be successful if we don't. And then you have to evaluate, are there any default values that might need to be purged? Default value. So I can put on my wall that I value connection, I value love, I value grace, I value productivity. But if default, my core value is comfort, I'm never going to live out something that is not comfortable. I'm not going to take chances. I'm not going to put myself out there. I'm not going to be vulnerable because those compete with my core value of being comfortable. So this is where it really hard. Do I value gossip? If I value gossip, I'm never truly going to get my organization to be to a spot where we have open, authentic conversations, right? So as a leader, not only do you have to internalize these for yourself, but you also have to purge out anything that's underneath the surface that might be preventing you from implementing and internalizing these values, right? And then the third one is this, implementation. Now that we've identified the key values and the key behaviors or the core beliefs even, and then we've started to commit our lives to living them out, we're building on our strengths, we're disciplining our weaknesses and becoming more self-aware. Now is when you implement it into policies and trainings and procedures and practices, right? So what are the practices organizationally or like the organizational behaviors that you can implement and how can you reward team members for living this out, right? What are ways that you can build this into your culture from a reward standpoint? And sometimes it could be financial. Sometimes it also could be something where you're just acknowledging people at a staff meeting, like, hey, you really lived out one of our core values here, and I just wanted to affirm that in you. But then here's the cool part about the clock building aspect. Can you teach and train your core staff members to do this with their team members? So it might be staff, but a lot of times in the nonprofit world, it's volunteers. If you can start to develop that leadership mindset in your staff members, oh my goodness, this is how you start to really embed this into multiple levels of your organization and transcend your culture. And it starts with the practices. And then what are the policies, the procedures, the trainings that need to be evaluated and updated to reflect your values and beliefs? You might already have this in your mind right now, but is it on paper? Because if it's not on paper, you can't teach and train other people. And then as a result, you can't hold them accountable for things that they don't even know exist because it's just in your head. So this is vital, but you can't skip those first two stages because if you just step down, write some stuff on a sheet of paper and hand it to people, it won't work. They'll see right through it. They respond to how you live it out. How they feel around you is going to be more important than what they see on a sheet of paper. This is the quote I want to end with, and Abby's heard me say this probably 1 million times roughly. This quote changed my life from a leadership standpoint. It's the most simple and convicting quote ever. As leaders, you get what you create and what you allow. If you're a leader who's taken over an existing organization, you see things that are bothering you, but you allow that and you don't jump in to step it up, now it's not their problem. It's yours. Maybe you've been leading for a long time and you're the founder of an organization, or you've been the face of an organization for over a decade. But after a while, you lose touch with what's going on the front lines there. And all of a sudden you start to, wow, like there's something here. If you've become aware of that problem, you are tasked to solve that problem. It's not just about creating the culture, it's about maintaining it. And I think that is probably the hardest part about this. But I tell you that This isn't just warm and fuzzy stuff. This is directly tied to your outcomes. I believe, and there's research that shows us that if you commit to this work, and it starts with just one decision, am I willing to transition from a time teller to a clock builder? You will create stronger teams. You will have improved sustainability, improved customer service, client satisfaction, because they will feel the difference because you're investing in your culture. You'll have better retention with your customers, your clients. That's going to lead to increased sales, increased referrals, repeat sales, organizational growth, or in most of our cases, increased mission impact. I've experienced this on a personal level, and I've seen the value of this, and I've been blown away to see how this can work if we commit to it. But it takes a lifestyle change, and it takes a mindset change. It's allowing that to come down into our hearts. But if you do that, I promise you that you'll see the reward. And I just want to say thank you guys for listening and to being a part of this. If you have questions, if this is something that you're struggling with, this is something I'm deeply passionate about, because I know what it's like to be there and feel stuck or burnt out, and I don't want you to feel alone. And so if you need some support or help, this is my contact information. I just recently started a podcast. It doesn't necessarily talk about just this stuff. It's called Behind the Image, and it's about how do we lead authentically about both the successes and the struggles that we experience as leadership, because people need to hear both. We both experience both. Why don't we talk about both, right? So season 1 is up and out. There's 10 episodes there. I'm in the process of working on a couple of things. Then hopefully we'll launch season 2 here coming up. But I would love if you want to check that out. But reach out, send me a message if you have any questions on this stuff or just need some support or guidance, because I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this, because I get that, because I've been there. I've been there too.
All right. Rick, thank you so much. And I could go on for hours as a testimonial for the success that I have achieved through Rick's coaching. But I will tell you that I reached out to him desperate with that Superman mentality. And after working with Rick, we have transformed tomorrow's rainbow, and all of those fears that I had. This is hard stuff. And if you feel like I can't do this on my own, I need somebody to guide me through that, I highly recommend reaching out to Rick or another coach that is going to have you lead your organization to the success that it's capable of achieving and leaving your legacy.